Welcome to the interview. I'm Ciara Pressler. This is Pregame. Pregame is the place for people with big goals, big ideas, big dreams, game changers to create their own game plan for success. And that is why we have this show. We interview people who are trying to do big things and find out how they got there, how they're doing it, and learn some success lessons from them. So of course I had to invite my friend, Ciara Iannarone. She is running for Portland mayor. That's right, that top spot in Portland. So I want to find out how it's going and how she got to this point and what her vision is for Portland. So Ciara, welcome. Thank you for being here today. Thanks for coming, Ciara. I know it's the busiest time of this entire campaign for you, so I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us.
Being in a room of wonderful people is what keeps me going. It's Casual Friday, so we got our tracksuits out.
Yeah.
What we live for. We get up on Monday mornings just so we can have this day.
I gotta say, you know, of course I'm in big favor of women in leadership, but I really, you know, am endeared to candidates who understand what it's like to text in the morning and be like, what are you gonna wear? What are you gonna wear? And one of my favorite Ciara for Mayor moments was when we did that panel at the Riveter, and you had to put your pants under your dress so you could ride your bike home. And I'm like, men don't understand that struggle.
Yeah, or, you know, I have to have a whole team. I have to talk my team through debate prep because there's a whole women's issues when you're making public appearances that I don't think men who are doing that understand. Everything from making sure I don't have bitchy resting face on, making sure that if I'm on a stool, that like if I'm on camera on a stool, I can't wear a skirt. That has happened to me before. The camera's like looking right up your skirt. I mean, you know this, you do so many presentations as a woman. So I have a team that's getting slowly trained into the what are the things we need to think about that we don't always think about sometimes.
Yeah, that's what I learned in 7th grade choir. Sally Gordon, Meadow Park Middle School represent. We had to learn always when you're on stage, have your skirt go below the knee. And I never forgot that lesson.
Yeah.
That's Beaverton School District, though. We're talking about Portland. So I just want to get this over with. You're in campaign mode. What is the #1 reason that people should vote for you for mayor of Portland?
I bring a real vision to the city right now. From what I'm hearing all over Portland, even in Beaverton and Tigard and Gresham, is that we've lost our way. You know, this used to be a place where we would come together, we would tackle challenges, we would mobilize our community in problem solving. You're in the entrepreneur space. You know what it's like to be a place where dreamers thrive, and that's an ecosystem. And what we've done over the last really decade, but the current administration is really the apex of the lack of vision, in my opinion, of what does it mean for us to harness our resources as a community, really get all of the best and the brightest at every level, whether it's small business, neighborhoods, faith-based organizations, our institutions, our policymakers, facing in the same direction, saying, what if we put all of our intention and ability behind addressing inequality, behind addressing racism, and making sure that we're forwarding climate justice? Because if we can achieve a more just, resilient society, then we're going to have an economy that's robust and prospering and recession proof. You know, it's not anathema. These are the kinds of things that green city leaders ostensibly have been talking about for decades. And Portland was on that track at one time, but we seem to have lost our way. So getting the city back on track, mobilizing our people, putting that spirit of optimism behind the work ahead. I believe that we're up for the task, and we just need leadership that believes in us and is ready to lead us back into that space so that we can get energized and make real progress again.
So if people can't tell just from that speech, you are a progressive's progressive. I think of you as the Bernie Sanders of this race. And, you know, I know about your background, and my favorite thing about your background is that you've been studying what makes cities work. for your career. And I'm curious, you know, what cities inspire you, and tell people a little bit about that background of your career in working on city planning.
So this is one of the things that has actually positioned me to be Portland's next mayor, in my opinion. I've been a mayor's professor in many ways for the last decade, as city leaders from around the world were coming to Portland back in the early 2000s because they had heard something special was going on here. And they thought, wow, we know that we need to make our city sustainable, and that Portland has a reputation for sustainability. So let's go kick the tires on what they've been able to accomplish, and then we'll bring those ideas home and we'll implement them. Well, by virtue of interacting with thousands of urban leaders from cities around the world, I was able to cultivate this fine-grained understanding, not just of best practices for cities around the world, but for Portland, because I was essentially a knowledge broker. My job would be introducing the parks director of Copenhagen to the parks director from Portland, or the city administrators from Tokyo to our elected officials here, and thinking about listening in conversation as they exchanged really honest conversations over lunch, on the bus, on TriMet. Tell us the real story about what's going on in your city, what's working and what's not. If you had it to do over again, what would you do differently? Or hearing a visiting VIP tell one of our elected officials, I don't know why you boast this as success. You're not really doing very well in this realm. You're a little delusional about what you're thinking you're making progress on here. I really started to understand the things that we're doing in Portland that are truly working. We need to do more of them as quickly as we can. The things that aren't working here, we need to stop doing them. And then what we need to do is stay connected to these global networks of urban leaders. And I really say that in an intentional way, that it's global, because we may be exchanging urban policy ideas with Melbourne or Tokushima more than we're with LeGrand or Bend, right? Because it's how we are meeting our various needs in particular contexts, where we can start to move policies quickly. I'll give you a perfect example. My team has been looking at the guaranteed basic income. And because my background is in best practices, we just went straight to Mayor Tubbs in Stockton, California, and got my team connected with his team, exchanging the policies immediately. What did you guys try? How did you implement it? Who were your partners? What did you do? And bam, we were able to then draw on their direct experience to start laying out a framework for our pilot. And because I have a background in best practices exchange and policy exchange, it was really easy for me to say, you know, our context, the philanthropic sector here is a little different. The institutionals have a little bit more influence. Public sector's got a little bit more power here, and fine tune that. That's going to make me a great mayor, I think, because what I'll be able to do is point my teams who are working on various problems to bring the different talent inside all of our city bureaus across the city and mobilize our people in connection with other cities working on this work. It's the antithesis of what we have now in terms of a mayor who really goes it alone and tries to claw through problems by himself. I'm just hoping we can open up, through my background in that area, to really robust learning, city learning, and making progress, because we're just getting smarter and wiser and more practiced all the time.
You know, I never thought about it this way before, and I think this is where you and I are really aligned in our philosophies of how things work. Is, you know, pregame is founded on this idea that trying to go it alone just doesn't work, and it's a very like American myth of like the solo entrepreneur who has an idea and like climbs the mountain and pitches the flag, and you know, then everything's great. You know, like Steve Jobs didn't do it alone. Phil Knight did not do it alone. You know, it takes a whole ecosystem, it takes a whole community and opportunity in order to be successful with your idea. And my number one complaint in the way that the US has dealt with COVID has been like, hello, there are 200 other countries in the world. They've all dealt with it different ways. Why don't we learn best practices from what someone else did and handled it successfully? And we keep acting, or at least our administration federally keeps acting as though, you know, nobody else is dealing with COVID. And so we need to like make up a solution all on our own. when that's just not true. I mean, it has been handled well by other countries. And so with everything that cities face, which are really complex problems, why wouldn't we have a mind share with every other city that's working around the world? It just makes sense.
I mean, when you think about it, COVID, this isn't new. The federal government has abandoned cities for decades. So this is one reason where, as we're going it alone, Portland could be looking to our very robust partnership with Vietnam right now. We have an amazing 20-year-long diplomatic and policy exchange relationship with Vietnam. Vietnam was masterful in dealing with COVID, and the way that they did it was through community-based clinics. Imagining if Portland just bypassed all the bullshit out of Washington, D.C. on day one and said, you know what, our people are too important for this. We're going to look to our friends in Vietnam. We're going to get on the phone. We've got our bench there is so deep, and they're connected across our universities, our healthcare organizations, OHSU, PSU. All of those relationships are there, and say, download from them this community clinic model, and we're going to start investing in it with our CARES money now. We're going to use it to administer the influenza vaccine this winter to make sure we're not having people die of the flu, even as we're facing COVID. Then when the COVID vaccine comes, we'll be ready to administer it. And on the other side of that, we'll have community safety hubs through these clinics where people can have overdose prevention and get, you know, basic health care or peer mental support. Think of all the things that we're struggling to provide our people from a public health perspective. We could be using the current crisis right now, what little federal assistance money is coming through, and our best practices networks around the globe to be doing better than Washington, D.C. We don't need to just always shake our fist at them and say, oh, you guys are horrible. We still need to take care of our people. And that's where I see so much opportunity. When we do that and we're effective, then other cities around the US are going to try and adopt that, and it will push up to our state governments, and hopefully it will then start to push up to our federal government. I don't see another way out of most of these messes: homelessness, climate crisis, you know, racial inequality, low wages. We're going to have to work on those problems here, and then they're going to have to trickle up.
Yeah, you know, I just finished this strategic planning process with Portland Fire and Rescue, and a lot of what was talked about is the drain on the department. And I would say it's probably the same for the police department, because so many of the calls they get are for non-emergencies, right? And the obvious answer is there are a lot of people who are better equipped to handle a mental health emergency, a chronic health emergency, which is like 90% of their calls. And so, you know, it's through strategic partnerships with other organizations that we can solve this problem. And it doesn't necessarily have to be an expensive solution, because I think the first thing people, you know, the naysayers will say is that's too idealistic or that's too expensive.
It saves money. I mean, this is where it's so ridiculous. The cost of not doing better by our people. Look at what we're facing with the crisis of homelessness in our streets. Look at what we're facing with the crisis of addiction in our streets. Supplementing people's well-being is preventative care, and we know that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's just we have too many systems that are vested in the dysfunction. So I'm so glad to be a publicly financed candidate, because it frees me from a lot of these ties of the way that decisions have been made prior, and opens us to innovation where we can really tap into the best available science, the best practices happening all over the world, and bring whatever coalition of the willing we need to have there, whether that's business or, again, institutions, higher education, philanthropic sector. We can bring them all together as needed to contribute what they can to address the problem solving. It's exactly the model we need right now.
So let's do a little round of explain it like I'm 5, because I know the more that you're in the world of campaigning and having to break down really complex ideas, that the more, you know, you get into your jargon the same way we all do in our businesses. So explain it like I'm 5. Why is the way you finance your campaign such a big deal? I'm
going to use the puppy dog pals analogy that my campaign director uses, because he's raising toddlers right now, and I have a 20-year-old, a 20-ager, I call her. So he says this: you know, when you're watching Puppy Dog Pals, and you watch Puppy Dog Pals day after day, You might not think it's the best show, but you know, you start to watch the episodes. You think, well, that was a pretty good episode of Puppy Dog Pals I saw today. It's not my favorite show, but that was a pretty good one. And suddenly, week after week, you're like, yeah, that Puppy Dog Pals, that's a pretty great show. Well, the same can be true of the people that our elected officials surround themselves and listen to. When you only expose yourself to one set of ideas or one set of principles or, you know, value propositions day to day, then those start to become your reality, and that's how you understand the world functioning. And when you're a person who takes a lot of money from people who have one worldview, then that worldview becomes, you know, puppy dog pal pretty good. You know what I'm saying? Because you hear the same ideas recirculating day after day. But that's not how my campaign is financed. I don't have a small donor base. I have a huge donor base of thousands of Portlanders, and there's a map even where you can look and see the person I'm opposing in this race has some big yellow blobs, and most of them are downtown. So that means a lot of rich people in a certain part of town have a puppy dog pal lockdown on how he's thinking about Portland. But mine is much broader, and there are so many that I don't even know everyone's name. And sometimes I feel bad about that, because I think I should know every person who's donated to my campaign, whether it's $5 or $250. But what that means is that I need to assume that the clerk at Safeway, the person next to me on TriMet, they might be a donor. I don't know. They very well could be. And so I'm assuming that every single Portlander I meet is invested in my campaign, is a part of what we're trying to do. And I engage them as if they're an ally in this work from the jump. It's just two different worldviews about who's in your circle and who's not. And so I don't know if that came across very well. Greg uses the puppy dog pals analogy better than I do. But it's this
On
sense
Twitter,
of,
they'll be like, Sarah Iannarone hates puppies.
yeah, I love totalitarians and I hate puppies. But that, you know, it's this sense that, you know, who you surround yourself with is whose ideas you think will be good. And when you surround yourself with everyone, then you're in, you know, a diverse idea set that really helps you get things done.
Okay, another one. Explain it like I'm 5. What is up with Portland's organizational chart? You've got, you know, it's not like most big cities. We've got the commissioner structure. So can you explain that to people really quick so they understand why it's so important to vote for these positions?
What, like you're 5, huh? I'm trying to channel my little neighbor. I have neighbors down on the corner that I talk to, so I'm trying to explain it like I'm walking past their treehouse because we hang out there a little bit. So here's what happens. Some cities, you have a mayor who's at the top of your city who sets the rules for the city, if you will, in terms of how's this going to go down. Here's what's bedtime, right? Here's what you got to eat your breakfast. You got to brush your teeth. That's the job of that person. And then they have all these other elected officials to figure out what the chore chart's going to be. But you have a main person who decides things. Now imagine if instead of just having your 1 at the top, you had 5 all telling you what to do pretty much with the same authority. Well, that's what Portland's weak mayor commission form of government is. It's 5 people who are almost equals setting all the policy for our city, but they also have another function, which is they administer all of the city functions. So they're balancing setting the rules with enforcing the rules and setting the budgets with enforcing the budgets. It's a really complicated balancing act. It's a lot for 5 people to do. We are all elected at large, which means the entire city votes for us. And that's a really big election. I need right now to win this election, because what I'm talking about is changing that system so that it can be more inclusive, so that certain parts of town can have the proper weight in their voice, so that more people can vote here, because a healthy democracy is good for your prosperous future, so that people can have a say in how the money is spent, so that not just a few people are saying. I mean, imagine if your mom and dad set your allowance, or your mom and your dad set your allowance. but if you had a say in what that allowance would be, that's what participatory budgeting would be like. So this is the kind of things that we're talking about when we're talking about looking at Portland city government and how it functions.
All right, I think my nephews could understand that. And last one for this round, my big cause is getting people to vote, not just for the president every 4 years, but for their local officials and be informed, and in the primaries. So what don't people understand about why voting in the primaries is so important, which is in May in Portland?
I think about elections as a conversation. So a lot of people don't think about it. They think about it as a race, like a foot race or a contest. But the way I like to think about primaries in particular is about a conversation. Is you've got a few people who have a lot of different ideas about how we should solve the problems for our future. That's really what elections are. Every time election year comes around is a conversation for all the people. Are we going in the right direction and we want to keep doing more of this? Or are we going in the wrong direction and we want to take another course? The primaries are where you work from a funnel, right? And take a lot of people with a lot of different ideas about which direction we should go for the future. Some may be the same direction, some may be very different directions. And you start to narrow that down, because what you're trying to do is go from a lot of different sets of groups with a lot of different ideas to who can the most of us agree on. We may not all think any of them are perfect, but through this winnowing down of the conversation and through the conversation that these candidates are having with each other, can we start to craft a community plan for how we're at least going to live for the next 4 years? We've had some extremism in DC right now, so that conversation is a little different, but you saw it in the Democratic primary. You would see those 12 or however many people were on stage, and they were all Democrats, but they had different ideas of what Democrat looked like for them. And you had Bernie Sanders and Liz Warren and Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar, and they brought different perspectives, and we started to narrow it down. Now, if that were purely equal, it would be the best ideas that win. And one of the reasons that I'm so fond of the public financing is because the best ideas, I do believe, are coming through. But what we've had over time is some outside interests that say, you know, I don't care if that's the best idea. I trust this person to meet my interests more. So the special interest money in politics has actually pulled us out of the integrity of that community conversation that we have through elections. But that's why getting involved in your primary is so important, because it's a chance for you to kind of put your vote with a person whose set of ideas you really like the best. And then as we work together toward that, we get into the general election where it's really the biggest, most general, truly sets of ideas that are going to prevail there.
Thank you. We are going to take some questions from our Zoom studio audience, but first I want to ask you a few questions that you don't get asked and most candidates never get asked, which are some human questions. So first
We're
of all,
humans? We're not humans.
Yeah, right. What is it like to run for mayor? I'm sure some people watching this have thought about running for office before, but what is it really like? What might surprise people about it?
It makes you such a good person when you're doing it for the right reasons, I believe, because I have to be careful with my words. I have to treat every person with the most respect that I can muster, because I need them to be able to communicate with me so I can share my ideas with them about why I want them to vote for me. So I have to, when you're talking to someone, not as your enemy, but your potential ally, you encounter them differently on that front. So there's an impeccability in word and action that has made me a better person all the way since 2016. I learned that in 2016, but I just carried it forward in the world. The downside is I don't tend to walk my dog in my pajamas quite as much because more people recognize me now, or if I do, I just make sure I am on cool pajamas. And so the loss of anonymity and privacy, they vet your personal life pretty thoroughly. And so things that might not seem relevant to my ability to lead an organization or an administration are somehow relevant to the public. And so that's been an interesting cognitive process for me, getting used to having not really any privacy. But learning that when you are in a leadership position, taking things personally is really a privilege that you shouldn't lean into. You should really not take things personally and occupy that position with grace, because then it's not really about you. It's about what are the people who are either hollering at you or admiring you, what are they really asking for? And then you take your ego out of it. It becomes a lot easier to just be, you know, a good actor in that space. Those are probably the top three for me.
So how do you deal with the haters? I know in the social media age, there's a lot of people who want to attack online, or, you know, some of the media. How do you just keep going? Because I know I might come across as tough, but I'm pretty soft inside, and that would be really hard.
It's actually not the straight haters who bother me. I mean, I grew up a girl. I've been on the receiving end of misogyny, hate, assault, abuse my whole life from different parts of my background. And so having people come at me and attack me, I almost am more prepared for it. It was the people who I thought were on my side coming after me that was harder.
Oh, wow.
You know, because like you expect enemies when you go into a big space, but it's people who you once trusted, maybe turning on you for political reasons, or relationships that you thought were durable, being more fallible, or like organizations or institutions. Like there's this coalition going on now for the incumbent, and some organized labor is involved in it. I keep thinking, why would you ever go with the millionaire who you're suing over the working class person who's committed to workers' rights, like to her bones? My father was a labor organizer on the shop floor as a factory electrician. I mean, this is in my upbringing and like the core of my identity. And so I don't always understand the politics of things like that. But I'm having to learn that power is its own commodity, if you will. And so navigating that is always pretty interesting.
How do you take care of yourself? This is a 24/7 job. What are you doing to stay healthy and stay centered?
This is a bit of a marathon when you think about the race that I've had to run. And it's almost, I have to take my relief the same way those runners grab the little cups from the side. You know how they have to grab the cups and
Yeah,
they kind
sure.
of pour them over their face, and they're getting a reefer, right? Because they get a little bit of hydration internally, a little cooling externally, and maybe even a little bit of human contact in there. I am just trying to take out the most precious moments that I can day to day, giving people the benefit of the doubt. When you've got an entire team operating at like maximum throttle for a long time, making sure that everybody's just really leaning into grace. And I don't know a better way to say that, but it's just quick. Like if things go sideways, it's quick to forgive and move on is a great way to just not allow stress to build up. So you just diffuse things very quickly. I try to eat healthy when I can. And I walk my dog like pretty religiously 2 or 3 times a day, and always taking that break 20, 25 minutes at a time. Try to put the phone away if I can, or maybe even just take a call while I'm outside but not facing a screen. I can rejuvenate even just that little bit of adrenaline and get that bits of exercise throughout the day. I miss riding my bike. Usually that would take care of it, but we're working a lot from home a lot more. So
I'm gonna toss it over to a question we have from the studio audience. It's an issue question. Of course, we've seen in public opinion research that homelessness is the #1 issue on Portlanders' minds, at least before the pandemic, but it remains a huge issue. And so what is your plan to, you know, we know that a lot of homelessness is caused by chronic mental health issues and addiction. Can you talk about your plan to deal with that?
I've actually broken it up pretty uniquely from what you'll see in most political campaigns. So there are 2 approaches that we've taken to dealing with our homelessness crisis, if you will. One is looking at what happens for Portlanders in the streets. And this is my Rethinking Public Safety plan. And what we've tried to do through that is really look at where do we spend our public safety dollars. Right now, an awful lot of them go into really bloated, militarized police budgets, and think about how we could spend those dollars more effectively. So what would it mean for us to do exactly what you and I were talking about earlier in terms of deploying a mental health worker instead of a firefighter or a police officer, you know, when we possibly can. Those types of things are on the front end of that. It's taking a public health approach to our most pressing issues in the streets. And that applies for other things besides people experiencing homelessness, gun violence prevention, traffic safety. It's about using the best available science and policy ideas and putting our money behind them to achieve outcomes where people's lives are truly at risk. Then on the other side of that is getting people into housing, and that's where my Housing for All plan comes in. And all of these are available at Ciara2020.com, Ciara with an H. And the Housing for All plan is really a look across the spectrum of affordability, from people who are very low income to people who are quite wealthy. And how can we make sure that we have neighborhoods that are diverse with a lot of housing styles and affordability, making sure that we have a lot of options for people, whether they need housing that's got a lot of wraparound services or even rethinking home shares. We have tens of thousands of empty bedrooms in this city right now. One of our fastest growing populations of homeless people is youth, students, and we also have elders who are struggling to keep up with rising property costs. So imagine the synergies of using the Airbnb style of putting strangers in lodging together if we were actually able to co-house students and elders potentially. There's a lot of innovations we can be doing across the continuum of housing. But what we've been lacking is a strategic plan. So our solutions in the last 4 years in particular have been really ad hoc. And so how I'm hoping to change course is by convening a strategic planning process to end our housing state of emergency so that we can align the various revenue streams, which we actually have a pretty good amount of money flowing into this problem, and put them toward the places in town and the types of housing in town and the community investments, you know, around Portland that are going to help us meet our goals in a more systemic way. So it's a bit of a different approach. I'm anticipating we probably can't have any worse results than we're having right now. Anything would be an improvement over what's happening now, but I'm optimistic that it's actually a good path forward because, again, it's coming from best practices informed by people on the ground who are working in these spaces, people who have lived experience, either as low income people or renters or people experiencing homelessness. So I'm excited about what we're going to be able to accomplish.
How about further upstream, though, with the causes and conditions of homelessness, mental health in particular?
I'm really excited about the ballot measure that we voted in favor of this May for Metro. That's going to help us get a lot more money in locally to the types of services that people need, the supportive care that's going to help people get into housing and be able to stay in housing. We had a question yesterday at one of our mayoral forums with Central City Concern about whether or not we should think about that even as economic development, because if you can get someone stabilized from, say, a mental health or addiction perspective, making sure they're not in intimate partner or domestic violence situations, then what you can start to do is stabilize people in their lives so that it's not chaotic from the moment they wake up in the morning to when they go to bed at night and even beyond. And through that life stabilization and that well-being, that focus on well-being, you can actually make it easier for people to stay in their housing and then go to work in the morning. But again, go back to that Vietnam model. Imagine if there were community safety hubs around town, so not just people experiencing homelessness, but housed people or even more affluent people who weren't sure where to go could find the resources that they needed. We need to start investing in public health as if it mattered, because it's costing us a hell of a lot when we don't.
Another question from our audience. It seems that liberals and conservatives are vocal on far ends of a bell curve, and yet there are terms such as defund the police that seem to have little definition, and these can mean different things to different people. How do you speak to the moderates, the centrists, the ones who want a definition, who want focus on the issues? And how do you get through the polarization and noise to make your point?
I've always tried to avoid entrenched politics. In some ways, that's made me a bit of an iconoclast as I'm out here politicking and just building a grassroots movement literally from the ground up. There's not a lot of gatekeepers or institutions who are rolling out the red carpet for me, in part because of that. It's so decentralized. And so what that offers is a freedom from the galvanized polarization that we see, to say this isn't a right or a left issue, this is a forward issue. This is a time when not doing more with less is not an option, right? We have to, as we're facing the COVID budget crunch that's looming, is we have to do more with less. So this isn't about an ideological battle, this is a practical battle for efficient use of resources. It doesn't matter what household you're talking to. If they're a working household, whether they're a conservative or liberal or progressive, they all have to meet, they have to make their bills. They have to pay their bills at the end of the month. They have to make ends meet, and they all work to do more with less. It's something we can all think about doing. It's about how do we do things like prepare for disaster. Well, it doesn't matter how long you've lived here, whether you got here from SoCal a month ago or you're a 5th or 6th generation Oregonian. If the big one hits, we're all affected the same. It doesn't matter your nation of origin, what language you speak, your economic status. So we can think about mobilizing, neighborhood by neighborhood, block by block, to make sure our communities are prepared and resilient. That's not a partisan issue. Making sure that our downtown is open for tourism. That shouldn't be something that is divisive politically. Making sure that East Portlanders have equal access as people in the central city. That's something that traverses divides. We have to find ways, and that's why values-based leadership is going to be so important. Climate change, the fact that people have tried to make it partisan is just nonsense. It's going to come whether you're Republican or Democrat or Green or Working Family Party. It's coming for us, so we need to get behind it. The earthquake doesn't care how you voted last election cycle. Racism doesn't care. So let's focus on the problems. Let's try to bring everybody together with what they can do. And I think that that's where we're going to make progress. And I actually want to make sure that we're not taking on fights we shouldn't be taking on when these are the fights that we need to be taking on.
A business question. This is sort of let's make it a three-parter. So how will you interact with the business community? And I would add to that, how do you interact with the business community? Big business, small business, and specifically real estate.
I always am so surprised at how, as the only person who's actually owned and operated a small business in Portland, who's running for Portland mayor right now, I'm the anti-business candidate, and my opponent, who's actually never operated a business in Portland, is seen as being great for business when he really just maintains wealth inherited generation over generation. So that one always blows my mind, but I have to explain why I'm got a good connection with the small business community in Portland. But what I really do, and this is actually a byproduct of my time at Portland State University, I have a really good working relationship with a lot of premier businesses in Portland, because they've often been the leaders and the innovators that people from around the world were coming here to learn about. It wasn't always the government that's doing that. And in fact, oftentimes it wasn't the government that was doing that. So you think about our leading architectural firms, people in energy innovation, transportation innovation. I have good working relationships with these firms and actually have access to their thinkers and their leadership. And so when I have issues with, how do we solve a problem? Even the downtown question. I know that there are certain organizations downtown that aren't my biggest fan, but I'll just go straight to the firms, because I don't need people to let me in the room before we can have a conversation. So there are plenty of real estate people who support my campaign and want to see me win, because they know that the ideas that I'm proposing for Portland are going to be good for them. Having a city that's fragile, lacking in resilience, not sustainable, not energy efficient, wrought with inequality, is not good for business. It's bad business. So this is where people who are on the cutting edge of how business needs to go back my campaign. Again, this isn't in line with certain entrenched interests who are really focused on holding on to the status quo, which I think is very fragile and is going to be prone increasingly as the globe is unstable from climate change. Those are going to be very fragile. Making investments in things like community energy are going to stabilize our economy. But this is where me just continuing to make the economic case for why we need to be doing what we're doing is key. But also when it comes to small business, I just support small business. I talk with small business. There's a lot of businesses, organizations that aren't the Downtown Business Organization, East Portland Chamber of Commerce, you know, Division Midway, Foster area, Woodstock area, business district by business district. I have fine working relationships with all of those, and I'll continue to have them. We need to make sure that we're shoring them up. So I'm going to have a lead for small business and entrepreneurship in the mayor's office, which we've not had in forever, who's in charge of aligning the various help around the city, making sure that capital investments and technical assistance and even just really practical problem solving is done. So a small business concierge right in my office is going to be a huge boon to the small business community, I hope. These are the kinds of things that are very simple, you know, practical solutions, but I'm looking forward to implementing them pretty quickly.
The small business concierge ideas is how we became friends, because I went to a debate in 2016 and you said that, and I was, the debate was in a church, and I was like, hallelujah, yes, girl. And so when we both spoke at a conference together, I was like, I have to meet you because that's such a great idea. And, you know, the current mayor could have implemented it, but he hasn't. And one problem I see in the small business community in Portland is that, you know, all the organizations are so fractured. There's like so many chambers of commerce. They have them by neighborhood, they have them by affinity group, we have them by industry, and like there's no one place to get a sense of everything that's going on and all the resources available, because there are people out there to help small businesses succeed. And to some degree, I mean, I do think businesses, both small and large, need to take more responsibility for their own success. You know, if you have the privilege of starting a business and owning a business, you have to protect it. But we do need an easier way, because our time is so precious in small business, to get the help we need. And so I really love this idea of a centralized resource. A follow-up question on the real estate is, what will you do to help the landlords given the recent restrictions that have been put in place in the city of Portland?
I'm not sure. Recent restrictions meaning the eviction moratorium?
I'm not sure. I think so.
Okay, so, well, here's where I've been pretty clear about a few things. I consider our local mom and pop landlords small businesses. I treat them just like, you know, any other small business in Portland that's doing business here, paying their fair share, working hard to make our city better. When I look at renter protections being in place, I think of those as consumer protections. Those are not a handout. As someone who ran a restaurant, I know that the health inspector coming through is not a burden, it's an opportunity. I don't want to be making anyone sick with bad food, right? Because that's going to cost me. It's going to cost me my reputation. It could cost people their lives. So we have a shared, we have a shared interest, and I'll talk to this a little bit, the tenant-landlord changes. We have a shared interest in consumer protections. When the guidelines are clear, then businesses know what to expect. And this is something where I think clarity is going to be important for the future. But we also have to look at the costs of making sure that renters aren't protected. And so we have to ensure that the most vulnerable people in our society are shored up, because if we're tipping people into homelessness, the costs on us collectively are exponential to what it would be for us to be able to keep them housed. And so this is where renter protections are not just an investment in consumer protections, but an investment proactively in making sure that people don't end up homeless in the middle of a housing crisis. When it comes to the bailout post-moratorium, what I have advised is that we focus whatever dollars come into our city on properties that are locally owned. And if things are owned by real estate investment firms, either from out of state or out of country, or hedge funds or investment funds, let Wall Street take that. That's a speculative, risky investment. And if they, you know, it's not my job to bail out Wall Street as Portland's mayor, and I have zero interest in doing it. So focusing always on making sure that our local businesses are shored up, making sure that the regulatory framework is clear, reliable, and then people can build their business model around that, and making sure that tenants are shored up so that they're not disproportionately negatively affected by a lack of regulation, but also making sure that they're not ending up homeless, and then we're paying on the back end through additional property taxes and every other thing to solve a problem that we could have avoided in the first place.
Last question, and it's a good one. One of our viewers has heard that you want to legalize prostitution. What is the reasoning behind this, and how will it affect efforts to end human trafficking? I will add to this question, is this something you would put in place in the next 4 years?
Yeah, and I really don't like that framing, legalized prostitution, because I've never said that. That's something that the Tribune has misprinted about me again and again. And this is a paper, again, that has not even invited me to a table to discuss being endorsed by them, so their journalism around me verges on yellow at this point. But in my Rethinking Public Safety plan, what I call for is what people in the sex work industry call for, which is a decriminalization of consensual adult sex on both ends of the exchange. Now, making sure that our sex workers are protected as workers is really important, especially when you think about who occupies those jobs. They're majority women, they're majority minority, they're often trans women in that industry. And so we need to make sure that they are not criminalized for consensual adult behavior, especially when I don't know where it's the government's job to say, okay, you can engage in sexual activity up to this point, but you draw the line here, or you draw the line here. Adult consensual sex work, whether it's in a bar, in a public place, or in a private setting, should be the purview of consenting adults. What that does is free up our public safety dollars to actually focus on things like trafficking. So I'm endorsed actually by Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women of Oregon organization because of my focus in this realm. I want to actually spend our public safety dollars not criminalizing people involved in consensual adult sex work, and actually focus on trafficking, intimate partner and domestic partner violence, solving rapes. I mean, these are the places where we're falling down right now, and we can really invest our limited public safety dollars in that area by not criminalizing victimless crimes, if you will. It's the same principle as decriminalizing people who are consuming drugs, right? It's the same decriminalization framework, that you don't criminalize things which we have better interventions for, and you really focus your public safety dollars on harm like trafficking, like rape, like intimate partner and domestic partner violence. So that's the thinking behind that. I encourage you to go look at my Rethinking Public Safety plan, because again, that was informed by people in the sex work industry. And this is what they're telling me they need to feel safe.
Thank you. Let's wrap it up with a little lightning round. No gotcha.
Okey-dokey.
Don't. All right. What is something you will do to celebrate if when you win?
I've been thinking about this because we're in COVID, and we had election night on the primary, and oh, this is lightning, huh? Sorry.
That's all right. That's all
I'm
right.
bad at that. We couldn't go out anywhere because of COVID, and so we were all stuck in our homes for 36 hours while we waited for the election results to come in. I think what I'll probably do, I'm guessing, is probably post up on my Twitter about like a mystery bike ride or something, and everybody can ride bikes, because that seems COVID safe and 6 feet apart. Maybe I'll take a big bike ride around town. Maybe a bike parade or something. We can convene one downtown, or march. I don't know. Something to get people safely distanced outdoors, though, because I miss being with everyone. I wish we could be together, but.
Yeah. We had a fun party on Zoom that night, though, with the DJ.
It was.
For all your volunteers. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
I think I'm just missing humans. I really miss everybody. I see your faces, but I miss your bodies in space, you know?
Yes. Speaking of, we had fun at the Questlove concert, dancing till 2 a.m. Favorite hip hop group?
I have to pick a favorite.
You're trying so hard to be nonpartisan.
I am. This is where I should really start alienating people.
This is the polarizing question. Okay, one of your top three, let's say. We won't make you commit to just one.
I'm not even going to go on that Tupac joke where they got Kamala, right? That was not too very good. You know, I don't know. I go way back to Wu-Tang. I mean, you and I, we saw RZA too, I think.
Oh,
So,
that's right. I was trying to remember what we saw at Star Theater. That was good.
I mean, of all time, I mean, you got there. A Tribe Called Quest will always be in my heart forever, like a heartbeat. I can never, I can never let that go. So,
I like that. Yeah. What is something awesome you've learned from being a mom?
oh, unconditional love. Oh, just the unconditional love of just knowing that if you can love someone like that, you can love all the people of the world like that, because there's nothing special about your kid, like, you know what I mean. I mean, it's nice, our kids are nice, and my daughter's in the other room, she could probably hear me, I love you, honey. But I can love her infinitely means I can love anybody infinitely, and extending that love just to all of our neighbors is such that, I think that's what being a mom did for me the most.
What's a sincere compliment you could pay to the current mayor, Ted Wheeler?
I love his jeans. He has the best jeans.
He has good style.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't always good. He got a style fix in there somewhere.
Oh,
But,
man.
he used to look a little frumpy, but he wears some fly denim lately. It's good. It's nice.
Mm-hmm.
I think it might even be Japanese. I've never asked him, but it's like, yeah. It's
Yeah.
Chris. Mm-hmm.
All right. We'll have to find out where he thrifts his previous jeans.
Thrift? Thrift? Yeah, no, I've never seen him at the Goodwill, though.
Yeah, he might be donating his other stuff. And our favorite question at pregame, how do you personally define success?
It's changed over time, but for me, success means you're living the life where when you get up in the morning, you can't wait to meet the day, and you do it as long as you can until you fall asleep, and there's joy in that, you're living. It doesn't matter what you're doing, if you're making a lot of money, not a lot of money, with a lot of people, by yourself. If that's how you can meet the day that way and find your own satisfaction in that, boy, you're so lucky. And that, to me, that's success. I'm striving for it every day.
Awesome. Ciara, thank you for giving us so much of your time during such an important week and such an important month for your campaign. We wish you all the best. How can we support you and follow what you're up to?
Well, I'll drop in here. My website is sarah2020.com. You can donate to my campaign at sarah2020.com/donate. We have a free concert tonight for anyone who's catching this right now. It's going to be amazing. The leads from the Decemberists, Pavement are there. We've got comics, and that's at sarah2020.com/concert. I think you can still get a few more tickets. So I'll drop that in. Just be a part of being optimistic about the future. Stay in the fight, stay up and stay in it. That's what we really need in Portland. We need to get our mojo back. So
I like that. Thank you, Ciara. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for having me. Have a great weekend, everybody.
I spit it cold like lyrically I'm a problem. That's when the show starts. I get it livid. I did it. So who the illest spitter? You just